And there's a headline from Matt Brown, who's one of the most go-to people in the industry about what is happening inside the beltway of college athletics. How are the non-power conferences prepping for a post-house world? Goes for pretty much everyone, Matt. We're all trying to figure this thing out. So tell us what you've learned in digging deep into the weeds. Good afternoon.
Thank you for having me. These are difficult problems and questions to answer because there's still a lot of information from the last conversations I was having with ADs and commissioners. There's still a lot of information that they don't know, right? To John's segment leading me in here, there's still a lot of unanswered questions about Title IX compliance or how schools have to divide up some of this money, or even what specific NCAA money is going to be impacted from some of these changes. But some of the big takeaways that I've gotten. So I haven't talked to any AD or any smaller conference commissioner who thinks, oh my gosh, we're going to have to drop some sports because we're losing some of this NCAA money, or we're losing, having to pay some of these back penalties. It might mean that we have to change some things we do in the conference office. It might mean that maybe some of our championship events are going to look a little bit different. But we can survive losing an extra 125,000, 150,000. The bigger questions are really about how the revenue allocation changes will shift the thinking. I think at some of the larger schools, I think it's more likely you're actually going to see bigger changes in sport offerings and sports budgets and sports scholarship at a place like Ohio State than you are maybe Wright State. And then how everybody here decides what sports they're really going to try to go all in on. Because I don't know if you're allocating 21 million of your budget, or even 2% for your budget if at the lower end. I don't know if you can necessarily go for a championship in as many sports as you were sponsoring before in a revenue sharing world.
And Matt, Trev Alberts, the new AD at A&M, got a lot of headlines at the SEC meetings by talking about dealing with expenses. And here I don't know exactly whether anything is connected to what happened this week between A&M and Texas, but it is something others are talking about. What are you hearing on that front?
Yeah, if I remember the quote correctly, right, it was that, if I'm paraphrasing here, college sports doesn't have a revenue problem so much as it has a spending problem, and universities and athletic departments continuing to spend more and more, and finding themselves in difficult situations. Everybody right now, from Fairleigh Dickinson to Rutgers to Texas, is looking for more nickels and dimes and dollars under the couch cushions. Some of that is going to play out in universities changing how they do their vendor agreements and licensing agreements, and some of these contracts that are the big part of my world, being really in the weeds. And some of that, I think, is also going to mean changing how much they are willing to spend on certain Olympic sports. And I don't want to sit here and say that an SEC team that just made the College World Series, it made some kind of strategic decision to downgrade. I don't think that that's accurate. I don't think that's so much of a factor in this particular footprint. But if you're a school like Ohio State and you're sponsoring 36 sports, 34 sports, are you going to fully fund all of those scholarships and the same travel budget and coaching budget and operations budget as you were 4 years ago? Or are you going to save some of that money, pull back, and maybe be more participatory rather than championship competitive everywhere, and maybe reinvest that money in your football team? And that is something I do expect to happen, not just at Ohio State specifically, but I think at many other similar schools, which will change how mid and low majors approach how they want to fund and sponsor sports themselves.
There's already a feeling that you have the two power leagues. We know who they are, and then everyone else, and then you just keep going down the ladder. Is that an accurate feeling inside this sport among the people that operate and administrate?
Generally, yes, right. And I don't know if I could say the exact quotes from maybe some of the low major ADs or leaders that I get about this, because I think this is an FCC regulated family channel. But there's definitely a sense of
give it a shot.
Sure. Well, oh well. There's definitely a sense of frustration in some circles about, like, why are we having these meetings? It's just whatever Greg and Tony say is what we're going to end up doing with expanding the tournament or changing the calendar for something or another, even though there's a lot more schools like the Southland Conference in the NCAA than there are LSU or Alabama. that tension's there. Now, what that means on the field is different. Particularly I think in the case of the Big Ten, if we're all being honest here, this is the league that's had an enormous amount of financial and political advantages for decades and decades. But they certainly don't win the championship every year, and not even just in things like baseball, where they really haven't been a factor in most of my lifetime. But in many other sports, where teams in the Big 12 and the ACC, and wrote about this, earlier today. Depending on the sport, sometimes Big West schools for beach volleyball or for men's soccer can still find ways to beat well-funded Big Ten teams. Big Ten doesn't win in hockey every year, even though they have some of the largest budgets. So I think there's a strange dichotomy here, where there's a sense among administrators that you have some schools with disproportionate power and influence, which isn't necessarily always the schools that are most successful on the field in the sports that people care about.
Yeah, I mean, we have something on the screen about golf. Coastal Carolina a couple of years ago won baseball, I believe. Sure. It does happen. Butler made a run 15 years ago under Brad Stevens in basketball. Haven't seen anything. Well, I've seen a few things like that since, but
yeah. We had San Diego State, make the championship game recently, and this actually is a conversation point that comes up a lot in my world, because I think there's a lot of people in college sports that look at this and think like, listen, we're adults here. We know that Troy and Alabama football are not really playing the same thing right now. We know that in a world where your roster's 85 football players, that you can't really be a low major and really expect to compete for championships year in, year out. We know that football is a different animal. But we also know that in baseball, a sport where if you got a really hot pitcher and there's an element of randomness, that a Coastal or a Southern Miss or a Troy can have a lot of success and can win, those games, and occasionally win regionals and advance to super regionals. We've seen this in men's soccer. We've seen this in some other sports. But where there's some concern is that the financial gap might become so large. And in some of these sports, it's arguably already happening, where you can't really do that anymore. And I think this House settlement and maybe some of the changes in scholarship rules could really exacerbate that. Coastal Carolina won a national championship in baseball less than a decade ago. Will they be able to do that again in a world where SEC teams can offer 30-plus baseball scholarships, and Coastal's ace might be a middle reliever for Arkansas or LSU and get a full ride? Maybe not. Maybe if the operating budget difference is only $800,000, maybe that's more possible. But we're not really sure what this world's going to look like in a few years.
That is so accurate. It's so great to see it, Matt. Many, many thanks. It's always nice of us here in the ivory tower to find out what else is going on. And by the way, I did not see the red light come in from Birmingham, so everything you said passed the censors.
Okay, glad to hear it. Thanks for having me on today.
Great. We'll see you soon, Matt. Matt joining us from Extra Points. We'll take a short break. Plenty of time for you to give us a ring.